Right now, I'm going to welcome in Stephen Lyman. Stephen, thanks so much for joining me today.
How are you, Nick? It's really good to, I hit leadoff in high school, so it's I think fitting that I'm leading off here today.
Oh, that's great. Well, you're not leading off your day though, as you are currently in Japan.
Not.
It is 1 a.m. So really, thanks so much for doing this at such a crazy hour for you, and really to kick off day 3 of PitchCon. So Stephen, tell me a little bit about your background.
I'm an epidemiologist, which is a word suddenly everyone knows in the world as a result of the recent circumstances. I mean, the reason we're doing this online rather than in person. Right. And but I actually decided to study sports injuries. And so I went and did my PhD at University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I studied under Dr. James Andrews, who was one of the top sports surgeons in the country. And he was actually involved in my dissertation on the committee and was one of my mentors. And my dissertation led to a grant from USA Baseball in which we determined the pitch count limits for Little League that are still in place today. So that was pretty good first study out of the gate from my research. And then I've been now for the last close to 18 years, I've been at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, which is the team hospital for the Mets. I'm sorry, Mets fans, it's not our fault. And lots of other professional teams in the New York City area where it's an Olympic, U.S. Olympic team hospital. Really, you'll see athletes in the halls all the time during normal times there. But I actually relocated to Japan in 2018, and I've been working remotely for the hospital because I design research projects, so I don't necessarily need to be on campus. I don't see patients. I don't need to be there. And my heart's here in Japan. So
wonderful. So I'd be remiss, of course, if I skip this fantastic intro I have for you. So I'm going to do that right now.
Sure.
Stephen is the only member of PitchCon who has a PhD, an epidemiologist by trade. Stephen also happens to be the best-selling author of The Complete Guide to Japanese Drinks, a James Beard Award finalist, a Shochu pro, and he's a fantasy baseball wizard. He'll be interviewed by me, Nick, who tried beer once and did not like it. You can follow him on Twitter at OrthoPEI. So that's OrthoEPI, not PEI, of course. For booze tips, at Shochu_Danji, DANJI. Yes, I butchered that so poorly. I am so sorry, but definitely give Stephen a huge follow. As today we are going to be talking about all these injury-prone players that's you're worried about in your drafts. Like, should I be trusting that this injury is going to last through the year? How detrimental is their playing ability? And there's no one better to ask this stuff than Stephen, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know much better at First Pitch Arizona and Florida, as he would just give me all this information about players. I'm like, we need to get this on a larger stage. So I'm really happy to have you here today. And on the docket right away, this is a pitcher that I think early on in drafts we were all a little bit hesitant on going after, and that's Max Scherzer. He wasn't escalated to the number 1 or number 2. I think that was Cole and DeGrom universally. And I think the real problem there was that there were questions about his back. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. So backs are always a concern with pitchers. And if you think about Kershaw, he's never going to be a 200 inning guy again, just because of that back, right? They're going to limit his workload, that sort of thing. Scherzer might not ever be a 220, 230 inning guy anymore. He's also in his mid 30s. So for me, it's more about age than it is about his back. Of course, it'll be a concern, but I think you just manage the pitch count expectation, and he's still going to be pitching at an elite level when he does pitch.
Sure.
He's not Rich Hill, right? He's orders of magnitude better and probably safer than Rich Hill. So I don't have a problem with buying Scherzer, especially at the price that he's been going in drafts or in auctions. He seems like a value to me, and you're looking for those high-end players who can give you a great season. Should he be your ace? You might want to do a 1A, 1B, like double tap some great starting pitching. He could be your second.
Cool. So I will say, you talking about limiting pitch counts a little bit for Scherzer. I really hope that doesn't mean we don't get more gifs of him shouting no at Dave Martinez as he comes out to try and take the ball from him. Staying on the topic of back injuries, there's also Fernando Tatis Jr., who obviously had his season cut short in 2000 2019 due to his back. What is that like? Is that something that we think will be recurring from Tatis Jr. in the future?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Tatis and Alex Verdugo actually had very similar injuries. They both had stress fractures or stress reactions in their back. This is a bone injury that's not actually a break.
Okay.
But typically, once they heal, they're healed. This isn't something that's going to recur. It's not like a slipped disc or a bulging disc or something like that. That's when back injuries worry me. Is when it's a soft tissue injury within the spine. A bone injury in the spine, once it heals, it should be healed. Now, what's concerning is that these young players are getting these stress fractures, and nobody really understands it because the Arizona Kettle Marte also had a stress fracture, I believe, in his back. And another player we're going to talk about later had a stress fracture. I'm not sure where these are coming from. It seems odd that young players are going to have stress fractures in their spine. It could be how hard they're swinging. There may be something we don't know yet. But these injuries are more common than I've ever been aware of in the past. So, but I would not worry about him from that perspective. It was actually, I'd be more worried about, he had an earlier soft tissue injury last season. And that's something that I would be more worried about recurring, but his back doesn't bother me at all.
Interesting. So soft tissue is actually the one that we should be focusing on for Fernando Tatis Jr. I wonder if
didn't he have a pretty bad hamstring? I think that was
might have been it. It's a hitter, Steven. I don't remember that. No, I do wonder, maybe it has to do with the workout regimen. Maybe they're not lifting weights properly. Maybe that's creating these injuries that's uncommon to be so frequent. So shifting a little bit to Blake Snell. And Blake Snell is someone that actually, there have been guys that have been coming back up because we think, okay, they're not injured anymore, and this delayed season would help them out. Blake Snell, though, is actually not in that bucket. He's definitely fallen in price because people are still worried about his elbow. What can you tell us about that?
So from my perspective, what I like to say about pitching is attrition, right? Pitchers, it's not if they get hurt, it's when.
Sure.
They're either hurt or not hurt yet. That's pitching. Blake Snell had loose bodies removed from his elbow. Doesn't bother me at all.
Okay.
That's not a problem. Now, doesn't necessarily speak to him having a long career, but that doesn't mean he's not good this year. What's not good this year is it sounds like he doesn't want to pitch. So he might be a better buy in 2021.
Well, he wants to pitch, just not at 10% of his worth, essentially. But yeah, so essentially, what you're saying is that this discount that Snell is given right now, as long as there's a season, you'd be jumping all over that.
I would buy him at regular price, and given that he's discounted, I would take that chance.
Very interesting. Fantastic information. By the way, everyone listening right now, if there's a specific player that you would love Steven to talk about, please leave it here. We have a very long list, but there's a possibility, good possibility, considering that I made this list, that I missed someone that you would love us to talk about. So please leave that in here. We have next Mitch Haniger. And the reason I have Mitch Haniger here is I remember distinctly, I believe it was during the labor drafts or it was something else where someone got Mitch Haniger and you had a sign of just defeat on your face, of just disappointment. Why was that?
I don't have a problem with Haniger at a good price. I think what I probably was reacting to is that they overpaid for him. I did an auto new draft recently and I got him for $1. And I think that's a fair price for auto new auction. So I think, Haniger, is he going to be around this year? Is he going to play? This gives the delay in the start of the season gives him a better chance. He did end up going to spring camp, which suggests that he's getting closer to returning, but he had that torsion injury of his testicle, which is never a good thing.
No. And
then he had 2 core surgeries after that. Right. And when you think about core injuries, those are the things that can linger for a long time. That's David Dahl. There's a number of players who have had core injuries that end up missing a lot of time. I think, again, Haniger probably is a 2021 buy. I think he's going to be a great value next year. I'm not sure that I would be spending money on him this year unless you're getting him for free, essentially.
So with core injuries, that's something that is recurring over and over. And even though he just went through surgery now, I mean, what would you really expect? Like if he said, I'm playing this year, Would you expect that as a lower level because he's still recovering from it? Is it just too soon for him to perform at a high level?
It's not even that he had a core injury or that he had surgery for his core. It's that he had a second core surgery.
Okay.
That suggests something went wrong with the first surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know if that's that he's injury prone or that he just didn't have a good operation the first time. You never necessarily know that sort of thing. But I think, cores take time to heal. They're a vital part of swinging,
right.
Which you may or may not know as a pitcher guy. And it can sideline a player for a long time. And so I would rather see him healthy before I go back to paying what I would have paid before all of these injuries piled up with him. I'm not worried about him long term.
Okay.
I think I'm more worried about him in the short term.
Fascinating. Okay, cool. So short term, Griffin Canning. This is someone that I personally love, and it just seems that he has the injury bug associated with him. The elbow is not looking good. Do you think that Griffin Canning, if he does show up, is going to be fine, or is this something that it's just an inevitable Tommy John down the road? How do you see Griffin Canning right now?
I think when I hear PRP injection and elbow, I stay away.
Mm-hmm.
There's very, very little research, high quality research that shows that PRP injections help with these kinds of injuries. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't. It just means that the research hasn't been done yet.
Sure.
But until I know that the treatment is effective, I'm not necessarily going to trust it. And there's another player we'll talk about later that there's no way that I'm trusting what his treatment regimen was. But with Griffin Canning, I'm staying away. At the price that he's been going in drafts, I haven't been ready to take him. If he falls, it's worth the risk, but I wouldn't take him at his draft price right now.
It's so painful. I mean, people are asking who would be the next Shane Bieber, and he is the blueprint for it. And Shane Bieber hasn't gone through this kind of injury history though, so that unfortunately makes me more out than I would much like to be for Griffin Canning. Let's just jump straight to that. Who is the other player that you would also associate with this?
All right, I have to look through the list. Rich Hill. We mentioned him before. Yeah, now Rich Hill's 40, so that's problem number one against him.
Sure.
Rich Hill doesn't stay healthy. The other thing is he had an experimental Tommy John surgery.
Okay.
He had some sort of tape. They basically used some sort of biologic tape to tape his UCL together. Now, the fastest motion that a human body can make is throwing a baseball. The shoulder rotates at something like 7,000 degrees per second, which is the fastest motion in the human body that's been recorded, at least the last time that I read about this sort of thing. The elbow rotates at something like 1,800 degrees per second. A piece of tape is not going to help your elbow at that sort of rotation speed. Now, he may rotate slower because he's Rich Hill and he throws a lot of junk, but I'm not at all in on Rich Hill. He would have to be free, and then I might stream him.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know there are a lot of people that are back on the Rich Hill train because the injury was going to push him back to about July or so, and then, hey, there he is, and no one is spending a dime on him. That's a very fascinating way of putting it. I'm not surprised that Rich Hill did this, because if he got Tommy John, there's no way he's returning in 2 years, and this is pretty much the last hurrah anyway. So he's the perfect candidate to test this biological tape, as you called it. I'm sure all of us are just envisioning Scotch tape, which is not what this is, of course. But
I'm not even sure about the material.
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry. So it was new to me that this idea of taping the UCL back together.
It's essentially Spider-Man holding the train back, is what the Scotch tape is. But I hope for all our sakes, and also for making all these gifts, I just would love to see Rich Hill just have one last hurrah. But I hope they don't do what they did to Tyson Ross, which essentially pitch him out there for 140 pitches in one game and just ruin his career. So I'm crossing my fingers about Rich Hill, but yeah, I think that's a really great point about this is not your typical, oh, he's healthy now. There is a lot of question marks surrounding that. So those that were really thinking, okay, Rich Hill is my amazing discount now with the delayed season, maybe that's not necessarily the case. I remember there was someone else we were talking about in Florida that Fast and I are huge fans of publicly, but we were a little bit worried considering how quick his recovery was, and that was Mike Clevenger. Remind everybody what that discussion was.
Yeah, so he had a meniscal injury, tore the meniscus in his knee, and I believe it was on his plant leg, his landing leg. And the meniscus is the secondary stabilizer in the knee. The primary stabilizer is the ACL, and the secondary stabilizer is the meniscus. And a torn meniscus is actually very common. About 70% of people will tear their meniscus at some point in their life.
Wow.
Most of us won't even know it. It'll be a degenerative tear as you get older. Your knees will start hurting. And part of the reason it hurts is because you've torn your meniscus. But for a young elite athlete to tear their meniscus is a little bit bigger deal. And what was smart is he had it repaired instead of removed. When you remove the meniscus, you then will end up having knee arthritis faster.
Okay.
So having it repaired was smart. He was young enough to have it repaired. All of that's great. But then like 2 weeks after surgery, there's video of him throwing and landing on that leg. And the meniscus, there's a non-weight bearing period. God bless you.
Oh,
there's a non-weight bearing period of about 4 to 5 weeks usually after you have a meniscal repair. You're not supposed to even walk your full weight on it.
Wow.
He's throwing on it. And so that really had me worried.
Sure.
That he was throwing that soon. He hasn't had a setback now. His meniscus has had time to heal. I no longer have any worries about Mike Clevenger.
Okay,
but
so
at first pitch Florida, I was very worried.
Okay, so that's a really great point. So your worry, I guess what I'm asking is he put extra strain on it early, but that is okay. It's all right as long as he has since given it time to heal. Then we're okay. Like if he was trying to go full strength in April, end of March, which he wasn't really. He was pitching, but he was still easing a little bit into it. But now that he's had all this time after, it's not like he's done damage that can't be repaired. Is that right?
That would be my expectation. Okay. He didn't have a setback. If he had re-injured the knee, if we had gotten that news, that's a bad sign. But now that enough time has passed and he hasn't re-injured the knee, he basically shouldn't be discounted at all due to that.
That's great news. So it's not like an inevitable thing because of that thing that he did. Awesome. That's fantastic news. Let's go to his teammate Carlos Carrasco. And he's obviously dealt with a lot. How is Carlos Carrasco looking? Is this just great? He's needed this time and he should be good to go?
You know, Carrasco is a really interesting player. I love him. Like I really big fan of his for a long time.
Definitely.
But, you know, he's got elbow tenderness. Elbow tenderness is never a good sign. Now it's not flexor tendon. He's not being shut down as off. You know, it's not quite as bad as that.
Right.
But you just always worry. I mean, Chris Sale had elbow tenderness for a long time before he broke. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that Carrasco will go another year, 2, 3 years before he breaks down. You know, but he's also a cancer survivor. And you wonder especially in this current environment, cancer survivors may have higher risk of bad outcomes if they end up getting infected with COVID. So you have to think about how they're going to manage him, right? There's unknowns with players like him. Jamison Taillon is a cancer survivor. I think we're going to talk about him in a few minutes. And then of course you also have Trey Mancini on here, who's is recently diagnosed. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change the likelihood of them having poor performance. It's just how our team's going to manage these players who may have some sort of residual immune compromise, and we just don't know. That's
a fantastic point. So would you say that the current price of Carrasco, which is not actually what has it been in past years, it's often outside of the top 20, closer to the top 30 starters, would you say around there that the concern about Carrasco is warranted, or maybe is that a discount for him right now?
I think that's probably a fair price for him. That's my feeling.
Okay, good. Staying with the Indians once again, there's Oscar Mercado, who hurt his wrist during spring training. Generally, we associate wrist injuries with a sap of power, but with this amount of time, is this something that we should just kind of forget about and consider Mercado healthy?
Not at all. I was chasing him in my drafts after the season was delayed.
Okay, so you're in on Mercado now.
I'm in. I was in on him before. A wrist injury. It sounded mild to begin with. He missed a couple spring training games. If he was missing playoff games, that's more concerning.
Okay.
Right, but it's spring training, and he had his job.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. So Mercado, yeah, you want that 15-15 homer the combo meal potential there. You should still be on that. So yeah. So as you hinted at before, we're going to go back to pitchers here. Tyone is well, he had in 2018 Tommy John. We were very fortunate enough to talk to him in February. Do you think that there's? I mean, there's a lot of talk about he's not going to be ready for 2020 anyway. How I guess this is a good discussion now. Just how do we should treat Tommy John? And so yeah, let's start with Tyone there.
Okay, so Tyone, to me, he's the easiest of the TJs that we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be buying him. I don't think he's going to pitch in 2020. I think
Right.
he's an extremely important piece of the Pirates' future. I don't think they're going to risk it in a shortened season when he's not quite ready anyway.
That makes a lot of sense. Then
yeah, with him, I'd be surprised to see him pitch this year.
Right. Then there's Michael Fullmer, of course, with the Tigers, who's had a long time now to recover.
He has, and I think Fullmer should be ready to go. One of the last things that often comes back for pitchers after TJ is control.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's showing good control, then I wouldn't worry about him anymore due to the Tommy John.
I'm telling you guys, it's coming. Michael Fullmer is going to be amazing if he's pitching in 2020. That is the best late round pick you can make, especially in your deeper leagues. Please, I know the Michael Fullmer breakout is coming at some point. That's great news. I mean, the Tigers, of course, haven't said anything about Fullmer. They've been completely mum on it. And I would think, right, it would be about 18 months or so since he got it. You could make the case too, like you did with Tyone, that the Tigers have nothing to compete for this year. And if there's any sort of concern, they just say, look, man, we'll just have you ready to go 2021. Everything will be wonderful. But hey, I would love to see that 2020 return. I'm sure he's so excited to pitch again. He's missed it dearly. So I'm crossing my fingers that we'll see him this year if we, of course, have a season, which I'm staying optimistic. I'm going to believe that we will have one. And then there is another person that initially I was really high on, and then the Chicago White Sox situation is a little muddy right now. They have a full rotation at the moment, but nevertheless, the upside of Michael Kopech is so tantalizing. Would he be ready if there were a delayed season?
Yeah, he actually I believe he had his Tommy John in 2018. He's been, he didn't get back last year, but he should be fully ready to go. And I've been buying him. I think he's a value right now.
Yeah, it's oh man, I just want to see him throw like 100 and like legit. Here's 100 as a starter as we expected, and to see him throw 93 even during that, when we were like, guys, like, why is he still pitching? There's clearly something wrong with him. Then there's also in the comments are mentioning Taijuan Walker, who is also along the same lines. Are there more concerns here? It's kind of he was released, of course, by the Diamondbacks. The Mariners brought him back. Is it the same story of just like, hey, Tommy John, everything is fine, or is there something more fine with these details?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to look him up recently. I thought I had seen something that he had a setback, but I'm not sure if that's true, and I don't know if I misunderstood what I had read about him.
I can't tell you either about Taijuan Walker, but I would say that, I mean, it's been long enough and he's throwing and everything that's a very fun end of draft flyer. Even at his peak, though, for an elongated period of time, Taijuan Walker never really was finished. When he comes to secondary pitches, every so often he had a nice splitter, but that, not so much. So even if he is healthy and going, then there's also the step of, okay, now you need to actually take an advance or take a step forward in your development. And I don't know if we'd be able to see that so quickly from him in 2020. So personally, I'm not targeting Taijuan Walker, but at the same time, I really can't wait to see him pitch.
And I thought it was recent. It was actually last May. He had a shoulder injury as he was attempting his comeback.
Gotcha.
But
okay.
if he's back and throwing, and they have him on a schedule, I wouldn't worry about him.
Okay, so
the Mariners clearly saw something to bring him in, and it's not the elbow that would worry me. Shoulders worry me more than elbows, actually.
Right. So that was the most of the Tommy John stuff. That was Tyone and Fullmer, Kopech, Walker. There's also Shohei Ohtani, of course, who I'm so excited about Shohei Ohtani. I think that we don't value his ability to be just an absolute ace enough. Now, there's a little wrinkle in here considering that he's also been hitting during this time. Do you think this has impacted his longevity with his new elbow?
I don't think so. I don't think the hitting is going to bother his elbow at all. I'm in Japan, as we mentioned at the top of the show, and Ohtani has replaced Ichiro as Japan's favorite son.
Oh,
he's
really?
an incredible talent, and I don't think we've seen nearly what he's capable of doing. What he was doing in the Japan League was just unbelievable. And then he ended up having his season derailed with the elbow, and now he hasn't come back full. But I think the best is yet to come with him. He's still very young. I think he's a tremendous talent as a pitcher, and he can hit. So he's going to be really fun to watch for years to come.
Nice.
I'm not worried about him at all. Although, again, his innings are going to be limited.
Right.
We already know that. It's just a matter of how many you're going to get from him. But if the price is right, then I would definitely buy Ohtani.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, obviously innings limits. It's weird to even talk about that in the late season because it's just shorter and there's no reason to think about that. But, of course, Ohtani would be pitching once a week. It'd never be a 2-start week for Ohtani, which is different because then that's just less volume overall through the entire season because of that than the guys that will be pitching every 5th day or so. So, I mean, I'm just so excited. When I think about baseball coming back, Ohtani is one of those guys that I'm so thrilled to get a chance to see him in the near future. So staying with pitching here, Justin Verlander obviously is a big question. This is someone that some people initially were thinking maybe he's actually going to be your ace, the number 1 pitcher in fantasy in 2020 after his fantastic year of a 0.8 whip, which is absolutely crazy as he won a Cy Young. But there's been some question marks in the spring. And what can you talk about that?
So he actually had groin surgery, which really shocked me when I heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I read more about the injury, and they've been more transparent actually with him than a lot of these other players, so we know more about it. It sounds like it's a degenerative injury, which means that over time, the ligament, I believe it's a ligament attachment in his groin had ended up tearing away, and he did have a rupture, but it was more of a degenerative sort of thing. Now, that worries me because the older you get, the harder it is to heal. Mm-hmm. So even if they did a very high quality repair, it means the tissue doesn't have the same strength and resiliency that it did when he was younger. Okay. And so it could break down again, but now that he's had more time to recover and he hasn't rushed back like he probably would have been trying to do if the season had started on time, I'm not worried about him. I'm still buying him at his price.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's fascinating. So I guess that there are 2 concerns you expressed there. One was, is he going to get enough time to heal? Which is obviously yes. The other one was that he's more susceptible now to this failing on him. But that isn't enough to scare you for 2020. No,
he's a pitcher. Pitching is attrition. It's like all of these guys have risk. If they throw a baseball, they have risk. Right. So I'm not, and also, you're getting him at his price considering his age. You already know how old he is. You know that older players break.
Definitely.
Or they have skills regression. So,
and I want to transition right there to something you were mentioning before we got on about pitchers are attrition and how that applies to dynasty leagues in this year. You made a really interesting point that I wanted you to get an opportunity to elaborate on.
Sure. And what I'm thinking now, because I play a lot of dynasty and a lot of keeper leagues, and I actually now think of pitchers as having basically been frozen in time this season. If they're a 30-year-old this year, they're a 30-year-old next year. I'm pricing them exactly the same as long as they have the same situation because they haven't put any additional wear on their arms. This is especially true if the season doesn't happen. The season doesn't happen. Those pitchers are frozen in time. The hitters have aged a year because for hitting, it's about timing and bat speed and that sort of thing, right? They're still going to age out when they age out. They're going to stop hitting when they stop hitting. For pitchers, they've got so many pitchers in their arm until they break down. So the pitchers are essentially, they're like that little ant in amber, right? For this year. But then they're going to be freed up again next year. So I think pitching in now, the way to think about it, I think, is there's value in buying pitching in these leagues during this season. And then they're going back to regular price next year.
That's fascinating. It's something I didn't even consider beforehand, especially if there isn't even a 2020 season. how much it can benefit so many pitchers for dynasty leagues. And not to be like, oh, well, then Scherzer's a year older, so then I'm out because of that. And you're pretty much saying, well, no, that's just another year where you get out of him now than you did before. That's such an interesting point. So
if I can make one more.
Yeah.
If I can make one more point about that, every time you throw a baseball, you're doing what's called micro trauma.
Okay.
So you're tearing the tissue a little bit every single time you throw the ball, right? So you've saved an entire year of micro trauma. The other thing is that the body heals, right? So those micro traumas can be healed, and that's actually how muscle gets stronger, right? Is by the micro tears, and then the muscles get stronger. Now the micro tears to ligaments and tendons are not as forgiving, right? Because those are avascular tissues, meaning there's not good blood supply.
Okay.
So they don't heal the way that muscles do. So I'm always more worried about ligament or tendon injuries than I am about bone or muscle. And then but the micro trauma can actually heal because these pitchers have had longer times off. So I think my hypothesis, I don't have data to back this up. I think probably these pitchers are going to be less prone to injury than they would have been had they been pitching a full season this year.
Interesting. So there's an idea that being in, well, okay, so you're suggesting, of course, that they ramp up, of course, because there's a lot of concern about this shortened season. Guys are going to have to get to game level ability faster than normal, so that it's going to make them prone to injuries. We've seen it a little bit with the KBO, more lower half injuries we've seen, but you're saying more so for hitters. For pitchers, this is actually a benefit, and yeah, they will need, maybe 3 weeks or so to get into it, but they've still been on a routine. They're still getting their throws in right now, obviously not as intense as it would be normally. And so you don't think that this is actually going to make pitchers more injury prone for 2020?
I don't think so. Not if the teams are managing them right. As long as the teams are doing what they should be doing, these guys shouldn't be up at game velocity and those sorts of volumes of pitches. So I think most likely this is going to be a benefit as long as the pitchers can ramp back up, in a reasonable way in a reasonable amount of time.
That's great. All right, so moving on here, we have a trio of Yankees here. We have Erin Judge first, who is dealing with a rib injury. Is that something that will stick around through 2020?
Now, this is another stress fracture, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the stress fractures we mentioned before were Fernando Tatis and Alex Verdugo. This is a stress fracture in a rib. What concerns me with Judge is they didn't know it was a stretch. It happened last September when he made a diving catch, I believe in the playoffs, or maybe it was a late season. He both punctured his lung and broke his rib, and they didn't diagnose it until this spring. He didn't break his rib. He got a stress fracture in his rib. They thought it was a different injury until spring, and then he aggravated it in spring. And he's still not taking swings. Right. Even with all this time off, he's still not batting. I think long term he's going to be fine. But I'm off him for this year. I'm not buying Judge.
And how about with Giancarlo Stanton?
Stanton is swinging. Stanton, he's had a series of soft tissue injuries, which makes you worry about how he's training. But now that he's taking batting practice now, I think he's probably going to be okay. He's still Giancarlo Stanton, which can give you very high level when he's playing. Right. And, he's super frustrating to own otherwise.
So, I mean, with those two guys in particular, one of the major things that we hear is, okay, these guys are large men, and that innately makes them more susceptible to these injuries. Is that something that we should be putting a lot of weight on?
I think it's not so much that they're large men. It's more about what their workout regimens are. Sure. And, Stanton is just ripped. And I think he could actually do with being a little less of a gym rat, right? He probably needs to work more on, rather than the strength part of it, maybe more on the flexibility part of it. But I'm not an athletic trainer, but that's my impression, is that he probably would be better served taking care of, getting more stretches in and that sort of thing, because it's these kinds of injuries that he's having are the sorts of things that happen because you're not stretched out, because you're not limber enough. So that's where I think with him, at their prices, I'm buying Stanton rather than Judge. this year.
Interesting. Okay, so you'd rather, considering that he was having swings so far, while Judge not so much. That makes a lot of sense. It's funny because I think in drafts it's been flipped thus far. People are favoring Judge over Stanton. I mean, I would say, given both of them, Judge is the better play if they're both healthy through 162 seasons as of right now. But nevertheless, that's a very fascinating point. And of course, there's James Paxton, who is just a whole career of injuries. Is it something that's going to continue with him? Are we okay with him, who looks to be ready to go if there were a delayed season?
Yeah, I've been buying him this season. Especially once I knew that there was going to be a delay. I think Paxton is value. He had a cyst removed from his spine, which is, again, it's not a soft tissue injury in the spine like Kershaw. It's not a bulging disc or any of that sort of thing.
Right.
He just had a cyst that he had removed. He's back to pitching. I think he's ready to go. And pitching is attrition. He's going to get hurt again.
Right.
But, he'll hopefully pitch at a high level when he does.
And I mean, he's gone through so many things. And is that just kind of okay? I mean, we put this label on guys, and you are injury prone, you are not. Is that justified for James Paxton? I mean, that was a cyst. I mean, that's not something that we should be saying that is typical. Is that just bad luck, or is that something that should even out or future seasons, or is James Paxton just kind of an injury prone guy?
The injury prone thing is difficult for me. I don't really think of people as injury prone, although we're going to talk about Byron Buxton later. And I have a reason why I think he's injury prone. But for most of these players, I don't think it's being injury prone. I mean, Stanton was considered injury prone because he got his face broken with a pitch. That's not injury prone. Right. Now, I do think Stanton's injury prone because of his training regimen with these soft tissue injuries that keep happening over and over and over again. But that can be modified.
Definitely.
Right. With pitchers, it's a little bit different because once you've had an elbow or a shoulder injury, you're always at risk for an elbow or a shoulder injury. So you could argue that that's injury prone, but that's just pitching.
Gotcha.
But I don't worry about like other sorts of injuries. Sort of don't bother me.
That's a great point. AJ Puck, of course, had a setback in spring training as he was actually coming back from Tommy John, I believe, or maybe he came back halfway last year. Okay. But yeah, let's go a little bit more into AJ Puck and where he's at right now.
Yeah, so when I looked into him, I didn't really find anything to worry about. He's now, I believe his TJ was in 2018. He came back, if I'm not mistaken, right at the end of last year. Right. Yeah. He was able to pitch a little bit as a reliever. When I read about his spring training setback, I wasn't worried. I still think he's a reasonable player at the price that he's going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wish that we get some sort of confirmation of what his role will be. Because the talent is there, and maybe it's not the full-on 3-pitch mix that we want, but I mean, he's still going to be a very effective pitcher in whatever role he's in. And it's good to hear that the injury concerns that we had, that's all in the past. Everything should be fine now with this time. It's not something that's going to linger through the year. So that's great. I mean, really, so far, the biggest one for me is you talking about Blake Snell, be like, no. Don't be worried about loose bodies. That's totally fine. He should be ready to go. Because that could be the steal of drafts this year. I mean, I've been seeing him outside the top 15 even. I had him ranked down the near 20. And hearing that kind of news from you, I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm certainly going to be shooting him back up because of that. That was really the main concern. Is like you have an injury label already on a guy. That's already a knock against him. But I think I'm going to be pushing him back up based on our discussion today.
With him, I'm worried about him holding out. He's just going to decide it's not worth pitching in the short season.
That's very fair. I think at this point, if you're doing drafts, you're waiting until there's confirmation of things. And that would include if Blake Snell is pitching or not. I'd be shocked if like everyone is pitching except Blake Snell.
That's true.
I think that would be an interesting turn of events. As I want to call him Snake Bell all of a sudden. Anyway, let's go to Trey Mancini now. Different case than a lot of these guys. Do you think we'll see Trey Mancini in 2020?
I do not. I think he's a 2021 buy. And I mean, colon cancer is no joke. That's a pretty serious disease. And so for him, I think, I wish him the best. I hope he can make it back all the way. And but I would look at him as probably 2021 value because I think people will forget about him a little bit.
All right, that's very disappointing again for $3 in a Triple Crown League and an AL only. I thought I got a steal. I wish him the best. I really hope that he's all right and we can see a healthy and strong Trey Mancini soon, because he's a very talented player, especially in the Orioles definitely need him as well. All right,
I don't know what kind of, if I can just to touch on the reason I don't think he's going to pitch or play this year is I don't know what treatment he got, but if he's undergoing cancer treatment, he's going to be immune compromised.
Okay.
And if you're immune compromised and you get COVID, that's very, very bad.
Right.
There's no reason for the Orioles to take a risk in the future of their franchise by playing him this year.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so moving on here to Byron Buxton, who you touched on before. How are you feeling about him?
So there's actually a number of guys who have had this kind of surgery. It's a labral repair. Mm-hmm. So you have a labrum in your hip and you have a labrum in your shoulder, and the labrum is basically the cartilage that the socket sits in. And when you have a dislocation, when that ball comes out of the socket, the labrum sometimes gets torn. Very common in shoulder, very common in hip, although hip dislocations are much less common. The good thing about Buxton is it's his non-throwing shoulder. So he's not going to have any limitations with throwing, which means he can continue to do amazing things in the outfield. But that's also the problem with Brian Buxton. He doesn't believe in walls. He doesn't he's fearless. Right.
What is a wall?
I love how the guy plays, but the likelihood that he's not going to run into something else, whether it's a teammate or another wall or whatever, just seems relatively low to me. And this is where I think of him as injury prone, and it's partly like how he plays the game. Mm-hmm. He plays so hard that he's going to put himself at risk, and so that's what I think is and again, he could change his game, but then that changes the player. Right. And he may not be somebody you want. Now, what I would say with that kind of labral injury to the shoulder, it could possibly sap power.
Sure. Okay. Even though it's not his throwing, it's his left, but still, even you need that turn when you're swinging. Right. Okay. So
it could a little bit. I might downgrade his power 10 or 15% for this season and see how he does, and then think about it from there.
Fascinating. So if you were on the fence about Byron Buxton before, to me, that would take me off of it. I would say, no. Okay. There's going to be reduction in power, even to what we were hoping for. Fascinating stuff. And when you talk about a player who's going to run through walls and everything, I'm just thinking of the discussions we had about Bryce Harper years ago. Because I remember he ran into a wall and then he was out for X amount of time. And that was, we're like, hey, is this going to be a problem with you, Bryce, that you're just going to get yourself hurt from going to the extra limit? So that's great to hear. Cole Hamels. I think actually this is someone, again, we were talking about earlier on, or actually maybe even before we came on here. You had a really interesting take on this, and I want to hear more about this.
Yeah. So all we knew about him early on was that he had a shoulder injury, right? And this is where that's not particularly helpful, because a labral injury, like we were talking about with Buxton, is very different than a rotator cuff injury.
Right.
And rotator cuff injuries are more common in pitchers, but they could have labral injuries as well. So you don't know what kind of injury he had, and the kind of injury that he had could make a difference. But then when I was reading more about how it happened, it turns out that he injured his shoulder during preseason workouts or like off-season workouts with a medicine ball, and that suggests to me that it's a rotator cuff injury. Now, rotator cuff injuries for pitchers are bad.
Yeah, terrible.
However, he's had extra time, and he's basically free right now. Right? People are off of him, so I've been buying him whenever I see him as a value.
I love that.
I think I got him for $1 in that. I think I got him for $1 in that auto new draft or auction.
I think that's great. I mean, people have forgotten a lot about Cole Hamels, and especially in a shortened season, you need wins, quality starts. That's your guy. He is a bit of a Toby, but he still has always had a near 12% swing strike rate. So there's a little more than just your 20% strikeout rate. There could be another 23 in there, which is very acceptable. It's near 9K per 9, 8 and change. So Cole Hamels could be a nice buy. To hear rotator cuff is very scary. Is that something you think that could flare up again easily, more so than other injuries?
Yeah, and at his age, I think he could be done. Right?
Wow.
If he actually ends up with a serious cuff injury, I don't think he's coming back.
Wow.
So
that would be such a
that's
sad
somebody I would be holding in
his career.
not somebody I would be holding in a dynasty.
Okay, interesting.
But I think single season, he's worth a chance.
So yeah, everybody, please leave the players that you'd like us to mention in the comments, and we have a few more left, and then we'll get to those in the comments. Someone you wanted to talk about a bit was Colin McHugh, and I really hope someone goes after him and gives him a starting gig. But is he going to be okay for the 2020 season?
I mean, he did sign with Boston, right? And
is that right? Okay, that would be the perfect fit if so.
Or was that last year? I think he did.
Maybe we should Google that. Please, but talk about Colin McHugh's injury, of course.
Yeah, so he's now complaining, or in spring, I think he was complaining of elbow soreness.
Man, I completely missed that. Oh my Lord. I'm so happy he's a Red Sox. That's a perfect fit for him.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. I think it's a great place for him to land. But he's complaining of elbow soreness. Now, here again, elbow soreness is never a good thing with a pitcher, but the extra time off, I think he's basically free.
Okay.
So I think he's worth the chance.
So you think, okay, so I mean, there's still some cloud about how much of an elbow injury it is. But is there any sort of clarity? I mean, generally you hear elbow injury, is that just you completely stay away, or is it like, hey, unless it's like a UCL thing, I think it's all right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really only worried about Tommy John with the elbow. If it's loose bodies, that gets cleaned up, that gets taken care of. I'm not worried about that. But it's also the other thing is flexor tendon and elbow tenderness. Those are the two things I don't like to hear, because it does suggest that there may be TJ in the future. But there are pitchers that have a little bit of elbow tenderness. They get some time off and it doesn't flare up again at all or for a while. So I think I have McHugh kind of in that earlier part of that, where he's had now a lot of time off. We'll see how, when he starts to ramp up again, if the elbow tenderness comes back, then you might start to worry a little bit more. But I think that at the price, I'm willing to buy in.
That's a really great point about just because we hear elbow stuff or even flexor tendon doesn't mean an inevitability, right? It's not like it's not an if, it's a when is what people would normally say, but it's not actually. This is something that can actually naturally repair if they're given that amount of time. And this is, of course, the time for all this stuff to heal. There's someone else that also had some elbow problems in spring, and that was Miles Mikolas. What's your take on what he's going through?
So, first of all, he's now had 2 PRP injections. So that worries me a little bit, like Haniger having a second core surgery. The fact that he's now had the same treatment twice before he's ever pitched in a game. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these platelet-rich plasma injections don't have good scientific evidence behind them. So I'm worried about whether or not the treatment's even effective. And what they've diagnosed him with is a flexor tendon strain, which flexor tendon usually, often ends up in Tommy John. And I love Japanese players. I also love Americans who come back from Japan. So I've owned him in several leagues over the last couple of years. You just don't get enough Ks from him to take the risk.
Yeah, right.
From my perspective. So I'm off of him this year. Yeah. I wasn't on him at all this year, and I still wouldn't be. And if he comes back and he pitches in 2020 and his elbow doesn't flare up again, then I'm back in on 2021.
All right. How about Luis Arias? He was obviously going through injuries in the spring. Do you feel that great? He's had his time to heal. He should be good to go.
I think he's ready to go. He had hamate surgery, which is he had a small bone removed in his hand. Having the bone removed is definitive treatment, which means it shouldn't bother him again. I've got no concerns at all about Luis Arias.
That's great to hear.
Especially with the recovery time that he's had.
Definitely. I mean, that might be a really good buy in Milwaukee. He's going to hopefully get the playing time with that trade, of course, coming from the Padres. So that could be very sneaky. And then there's Yoenis Cespedes, who we all really want to play again. Obviously, the whole Bohr incident. Talk to us about Cespedes. I mean, is he actually going to play again?
I think all of us are rooting for him. He's just such an amazing player when he's healthy.
Right.
He just loves playing the game, and he's an amazing talent. Yeah, but when you see wild boar attack as the reason for injury, that's just mind blowing.
Right.
So he had bilateral ankle injuries, and it's taken him, and I believe he had setbacks as well.
Mm-hmm.
And given his age, I don't have a lot of optimism. He's still a dollar days player for me, but I don't think I'm taking a bigger chance on him than that for 2020. Now, they are talking about potentially implementing a universal DH this season.
Yes.
Which would help him a lot because he wouldn't have to play the field. I don't know. I think he should be what I thought the Melts were going to do is get him back healthy, showcase him a little bit, and trade him to an AL team.
Sure.
But now if they can just play him at DH, then that's their showcase. But I don't see him as a viable everyday field player going forward. So I think he's either DH only or he's out of the league.
That's a great point. And yeah, right. Spez could be that person that really benefits from the universal DH. But I mean, I guess the good news here is that it does seem like Cespedes could be ready to go. It's a question of like, is he just going to not show up? Is he still more hurt and need more time? But it does look like, from what I'm hearing here, that they maybe we'll be seeing some Cespedes in 2020, which would be fantastic. All right, so I'm going to jump to some viewer comments, some players they want to hear. I'm seeing a lot of Yordan Alvarez, who obviously has been dealing with knee soreness. It's been a very constant discussion there. Can you talk a little bit about just knee soreness in general for hitters, and maybe a little bit specifically with Alvarez?
I looked into him, and it's not exactly clear why he's having knee soreness. And so, remember, I talked about the meniscus injuries earlier with Clevenger. If he has meniscal injuries that have not been treated, that's problematic because it means he's been playing on these sore knees for a while, and he's probably doing more damage to them. And he's not a svelte guy, right? So, David Ortiz, by the end of his career, was having a lot of trouble with his knees. But it didn't really start until later. The fact that it's starting earlier for Alvarez has me worried, but he's still an amazing talent. And if the knee problems don't go away, that has me worried. If he comes back and ramps up for this mini season and he doesn't seem to have any problems, maybe it's okay. Maybe he's going to be fine. It's really, really tough to tell because there's just not good information about him.
Yeah,
about what's actually wrong with his knees.
But in general, I guess, I mean, very broadly, when you hear knee soreness from a hitter, is that something that you think does lead to something worse, or is it just something that's like temporary and kind of gets blown over? I
don't really worry about it too much because unless I know exactly what kind of injury it is. Obviously, Dustin Pedroia's career has ended because of his knees. I mean, he's still on the 60-day DL, but what are the chances?
Sure.
After all that time off. And then, Andrew Mccutchen, who's not on our list, he had an ACL injury that ended his season. I have no worries about him because I think he's, that we knew what was wrong with him. He had the surgery. He'll be back, right? He might not, he had already lost most of his speed. So it wasn't like we were going to drop him from 25 to 15 steals. He's going from 7 to 5 or something. Definitely. So I'm not worried about him because we don't know what's wrong with Alvarez. That makes me worried.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so Garrett Brodeur has a more general question, which I think is an interesting one. On the discussion that we had about this being an Anton Amber season for pitchers, Garrett asks, doesn't the arm naturally lose strength with age, even absent a year of pitching wear?
I think that's true, but if you think about the pitchers who pitch for a long time, other than Clemens, they don't do it with velocity.
Sure.
They do it with guile. Right. They learn to pitch. I think, better than I, but I think Cole Hamels used to throw a lot harder than he does now.
Yeah, he lost about 2 ticks in the past 3 years or so.
Yeah. And there's a number of pitchers who are like that they, there are very few guys who can throw 97, 98 when they're, in their late 30s. You got Clemens, you got Nolan Ryan, but most pitchers are going to continue in the league because they've learned how to pitch. And so I think what you've done is you bought an extra season of their arm not breaking down, because most pitchers' careers end because of arm injuries.
Right.
It's not because of lost performance.
Right.
Even if they don't go on to have surgery, it's because they've broken down and they just can't do it anymore. But that's probably injury related rather than performance related.
Mm-hmm. And another question here about Christian Yelich, who obviously has had injury questions. And I think if everyone expected a full season from Christian Yelich, then I would argue that he is the number one fantasy player for 2020. Should we be concerned about Yelich, or is that actually something, yeah, guys, go take him as number one?
I've got no problem with Yelich as number one. I think, especially in a shortened season, he should be fine. I'm not really worried about the injuries that he's had, so I don't discount him.
Well, that sounds great to me. Fast, I don't know if you're watching right now, but yeah, I do plan on taking Christian Yelich with the number one pick in the Pitcher Staff League. If it's a shortened season, 80 games, Christian Yelich is just the best. He's just the coolest, and I want that. 50-point average difference between him and Acuna for the most part. So we have a really fun question here from Scott Chu. He asks, a lot of fantasy players use 30 as a general divider between younger and healthier / older and brittle. Is there any truth to using a number like 30, or should it be based on something else?
Well, I think if you think about when we're talking about pitchers, especially starting pitchers, I think it's innings.
Right.
Felix Hernandez or CC Sabathia come to mind as guys who just racked up incredible innings counts early in their career, and they end up not being as effective later. And so, but for hitters, you do slow down with age, but I don't know that it's linear in how you deteriorate as a hitter, and it does seem individualistic, right? David Ortiz was an elite hitter until his late 30s, where other guys seem done in their by 30. I think for catchers, you certainly can use 30 as a good point at which you expect skills deterioration. But other positions, I don't know that 30 is the right number, but you may. I think that is a good question, and I'm not sure that I have a clear answer for it, especially for hitters. But yeah, I don't really think of somebody as, I don't worry about their age personally until they're entering their age 34 season.
Okay, age 34.
31, 2, 3. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Good to understand. Like, hey, 34 is kind of really where that cliff starts to hit. 30, not as scary of a thing. I mean, I know certainly for me when I turned 30, that was very scary.
I wish I remembered turning 30.
I was not happy with it. But anyway, Steven, I really, really want to thank you so much for being a part of this. It was awesome. So much insight. I'm actually going to be changing a little bit my ranks just because of the smart takes that you had about these injuries and how we should be treating them moving forward. So really, thank you so much for taking the time and to go over all these injury-prone players with me.
Sure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Take care, Steven. Go get some sleep now, okay?
I will. Thanks a lot.
All right.